Welcome back to A Story to Tell on the campus of Dixie State University. Again, we have with us Casey Zeman, our co-host, and Dean Cox, the new political, fantastic, what do I call you?
I think it's called Commissioner-elect for Washington County.
Oh, that's all it is?
That's pretty simple.
You won pretty big, didn't you?
You know, it was very gratifying, and this process, Lane and Casey, has been one of the most difficult and challenging things that I've ever done in my life. Yet it's also been extremely rewarding, especially in the early stages of the campaign as I went from door to door and was introducing myself to people all across the county. I had a chance to visit with hundreds of people and find out what issues were important to them. And I always like to ask the why question and try to understand at a little deeper level what makes people be for or against the Lake Powell pipeline, or for or against growth. And I learned a lot. It's been said you have to walk a mile in another man's shoes to really understand it, but as I visited with the different people on the campaign trail, it really did deepen my understanding of the issues that we face as a county.
How many doors did you knock on?
Just shy of 500.
How many days did it take you to do that?
6 weeks, and I couldn't do it all day during the day. I held a regular job down for the whole first portion of the campaign up through the primary. I was the county administrator, and of course I couldn't do any campaign work on county time or at the county building, and so that was all done after work and generally until about 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night.
Well, that was nice. You knocked on 500 doors.
I did.
Did you go around different places or just?
I did. I tried to sprinkle it throughout the county.
Did you get any doors slammed in your face?
No, I had a few people that maybe didn't have the time, but when you explained why you were there, I found that most people in Washington County are like people everywhere else. They're just wonderful. And when you're just moving around and knocking on a door, you sometimes come upon a family home evening or a family party or somebody just getting ready to leave.
In?
Did I get invited in?
To the parties?
Absolutely.
Did they invite you to dinner?
I didn't get any dinner invites.
Well,
but I had plenty of offers for cold water and lemonade and things like that.
Explain the county or county commission what they have authority over. Do they have authority over the people that live in the cities? Or just
No, not at all. Well, they certainly interact and on behalf of all of the residents of the county, whether they're in the incorporated cities or out. But the county commissioners, Lane, primarily are responsible for the unincorporated areas of the county. And so I'll give you examples of each. For example, if we were looking at building ordinances and things like that, that would only have any carry through on those unincorporated areas. Those are areas like Pine Valley, Central, Gunlock, Brookside, small places that don't have their own mayors and city councils. Yet another example of something that the county commission can do that impacts everyone in the county is the recent Proposition 1 that we had on our ballot. That was on all ballots countywide by resolution of the county commission.
Were you for or against that?
I personally was opposed to it. I am not against transportation at all, and it is vitally important that we find ways to secure adequate funding for our transportation infrastructure. It's essentially the basis of our economy. Where I wasn't comfortable with it was the fact that it didn't have a sunset clause on it. And I like taxes as much as possible to be borne by those who benefit directly from the tax itself. And so let's just take, for example, all of our groceries are trucked in, and diesel fuel has a 5-cent additional tax placed on it. It's higher than gasoline by 5 cents. And so as all of those come into our stores and all of the commerce in the county, those freight charges are actually built into the prices of the products we pay. And so even if I didn't drive a car, if I purchased anything in St. George, I would be indirectly contributing to the road tax. The way the proposition was written, I never had a chance to see that there was any causal benefit by making it just an across-the-board sales tax. And it was done, I thought, maybe a little more hastily than it could have been by the legislature. The county really worked hard with the legislature to try to get the gasoline tax revisited. The last time the tax had been raised prior to 2016 was in 1997. And in 1997, we've seen oil prices go way up. The value of the dollar has been marginalized by inflation. And it was becoming increasingly difficult for communities and for the county to maintain roads. Maintaining roads is far less expensive than putting new asphalt down. And so we wanted them to revisit the gasoline tax. The legislature did that, and they put a nominal 5-cent increase on it. And then they indexed it so that it would not go lower than if the price were $2.45 per gallon, and indexed it up to about $4.40 a gallon. So as gasoline goes up and down in that range, the fuels tax moves with that. And that's going to be very beneficial. But I think the legislature didn't want to take the heat for passing a big tax increase, and so they allowed counties to put this out in the form of Proposition 1. And 7 counties in the state, I believe, have adopted it, and the rest have not. So it's one of those things that we need to look at. And I certainly am in favor of transportation. And I know that our communities need those funds, but I just don't want to see it tied to a general sales tax.
I read somewhere that the road funding was dropping off because of these new hybrid cars.
Making a big difference. And it's not just hybrid cars. We've got totally electric cars now that are coming out and becoming way more popular than they used to be. And they don't pay any gasoline or road tax at all because they don't use any gasoline. And of course, we call them the CAFE standards, or the corporate average fuel economy standards, have been mandated by the EPA to get higher and higher. And as those cars get more efficient, that also brings in less and less revenue for the maintenance of the roads. And so it's a real issue. There's some innovative designs and plans to fix that. One of the things that the legislature has looked at is putting a comparable gas tax on the registration fee for cars that are electric. In Oregon, they've tested out a small computerized device that plugs into the data port of a car and will actually keep track of how many miles you drive the car. And then if you've got an electric or a hybrid, you'd pay only for the use of the roads. And so a car that was parked and in the garage 6 days out of 7 wouldn't pay as much road tax as one that's running to work every single day. And so I think technology is really going to solve this problem for us, and that's why I just soon take our time, do it once, and do it right.
Well, Dean, sorry, Elaine.
If you fly an airplane, is there tax on that?
Yeah, the gasoline is quite expensive on aviation fuel.
Go ahead, Casey.
Well, Dean, I have a couple questions for you that I wrote up as his co-host. So my first question for you is, what is your favorite part of being a county administrator?
Well, I'm not the county administrator anymore, Casey.
Okay.
But I was the county administrator for 7 years, and when I decided I wanted to run for the county commissioner, I decided it would be best for me to step back from my county administrator responsibilities, and so I resigned from the county in August. That gave me an opportunity to run without being an employee of Washington County. But what I really enjoyed with it, Casey, was I got a chance to be involved in every aspect of county governance. There are many departments, running from the road department to our county libraries.
How many departments?
16. And so it gave me a chance to see all of our employees and where they worked, to experience what they're doing for the people of Washington County. I had a chance to work with the budgets of the entire county and to become familiar with where your tax dollars are not only raised, but how they're also being spent. And so it was a very rewarding experience, and one that I will always remember fondly.
Yeah. Well, my next question for you is, how has been the county, well, since you're not the county administrator, we'll just put the county commissioner. How has been the county commissioner helped you in your life and helped you to see how you've helped other people in Washington County?
Well, you know, my experience with the county, Casey, began a long time ago. And I got out of school when I was about 25 and came back with my wife, and we purchased a business on Bluff Street, but I started volunteering for the county then. And it's that role as a volunteer that ultimately led the county to ask me to manage emergency services for the county. I did that as the emergency services director for 19 years. And then 7 years as the county administrator, I believe, has prepared me very, very well for the assignment that I've ran for and been elected to, and that's serving the citizens of Washington County as a county commissioner. And while I don't have any real experience doing that yet, I've worked closely enough with our other commissioners long enough that I feel I have a really good sense for what that will involve. And I think that if a person really works hard and makes decisions based on what will do the greatest amount of good for the largest number of our county's residents, that they'll really have an opportunity to make a meaningful difference in the future.
Mm-hmm. See, I just really enjoy being, Lane's co-host, and so it was really cool, and so last night I was thinking about it, and the other question I have, one more, we're actually going to ask you two more, and we're going to skip one, but what is the role as a county administrator or a county commissioner?
The role of the county administrator is different than the county commissioner, and that's one of the things. That's a really good question. A lot of people don't understand that. I was on a radio program a couple of weeks ago, and I had a caller call in and say, "You were the county administrator for 7 years. Why didn't you fix and do those things that you want to do now?" And
Well, that's a good question.
well,
Yes, it is.
Let me tell you about that. It is a good question. But county administrators don't make policy, and they don't vote on resolutions. County administrators execute policy, and for example, when the county commission adopts a budget, and they say they give the sheriff a budget of, let's just say, $2 million, and some other department a budget, my job as the county administrator is to make sure that they're staying within that budget. And so I didn't set the budget. I made sure that county policy was being followed, that it was being applied evenly and fairly, and that the directives of the county commissioners were being faithfully executed by by the county department heads and employees. And so what I'm doing as a county commissioner is going to take that administrative hat off and become more of a policy maker and be able to vote on what types of agendas we want to pursue. For example, how do we interface most effectively with the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service or the Park Service? When we take all of these different entities together, they own 77% of all the land in Washington County. Wow. And what's privately owned, because the state of Utah owns a lot, but what's privately owned is only 17%. And so decisions that are made by federal land policy managers have a huge impact on the county. And it's deciding and figuring out how we best accomplish the goals and work to ensure that all of our county's residents have the greatest access possible in a responsible way. Those are things that the commissioners can do.
Now they've changed that, the county administrator, haven't they?
Yeah. You know, when I came in as the county administrator, we had some really great commissioners. They were heavily involved. Commissioner Gardner is an expert in public land issues and matters. Commissioner Erdley was very astute financially, and he was really good at recognizing budgets and making sure that they were being adhered to. And they decided that it would really be to their benefit if they could leverage their skills and abilities to the very best of their potentials, and they had an administrator to carry out a lot of what I'd call the more mundane things, like writing the letters to the congressman and interfacing the way that the administrator does. With our new commissioners that have come on board since then, they're just really ambitious, they're hardworking, they've got energy and time, and we looked at our budgets, and we want to stretch our tax dollars out as far as they can go. But I think that we just came to a conclusion that if all three of the commissioners could agree on how to be responsible for different departments within the county, that instead of having one administrator oversee all of those department heads, it would be more work for the commissioners. But I think it's something that we can do, and it has the potential of saving a lot of money.
Well, years ago when I was involved in Salt Lake County, there were 3 commissioners up there, and they each were supervised the departments, like you're talking about.
And that's what we're going to do.
Of course, now Salt Lake County has a county council or something,
Right.
whatever that's worth. But the others seem to work well for them up there in years past.
But with their county council form of government, basically the mayor
Right.
becomes the administrator.
So it's totally different.
And
But
so
I
it's
kind of like
different.
the other situation better, where it's more hands-on, closer to the people.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable with it, and I'm excited to be able to participate and be involved in that.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the problems we're facing. Water and the Lake Powell pipeline.
You know, that was one of the most intriguing things that I learned as I was telling you as I went from door to door. Now you have to understand my background, and I have to understand your background sometimes to figure out why we think the way that we think, but we all have validity for our points of view. My great-great-grandfather and great-grandfathers came into the St. George Valley back in 1861, in the fall of 1861. And in 1861, we had 3 water sources that were potable in the area. They had what they called the Temple Springs, and that was water that they ditched down for watering the grounds and supplying the St. George Temple. And then they had an east spring and a west spring at the base of the Red Hill. And my dad would tell me stories about how they had to go pull their water out of the ditch that they would need that day before 7 a.m. because after 7 a.m. they let the animals out. Waterborne diseases killed a lot of young children in early St. George history. And so the quest to improve the water distribution system and secure sources for a growing community has been something that I've watched my whole life, and I'm a bit of a student of history. It's also occupied a lot of time and attention of all of my forebears who have lived here. And so when I visit with people about the Lake Powell Pipeline, you'll find people, Lane, that come to St. George as a retirement community. They might come from Las Vegas or California, Salt Lake, or anywhere else.
Panaca.
Maybe, are you from Panaca? And their children have careers and occupations. They're successful in other places. And they love Washington County the way they see it. And they want it to stay that way. And I appreciate that point of view. Growing up in St. George makes me think hard about some of the things that I've been involved in. And one of those was, as a voter, I got to vote on Quail Lake. And when Quail Lake was built in the early 1980s, it was an extremely expensive project. It cost about $35 million. The entire assessed valuation of Washington County back then was just a little over $100 million. And so that single water improvement cost 35% of the assessed value of the county. It was controversial then. It would have been very, very expensive for the county's residents to pay for that if the population would have remained static. But the reality is they're not making any more of Washington County, and it's a phenomenal place to live and raise a family. And so people move here. And my generation is really the first generation that had the opportunity to live and work here after we got out of school because there were jobs. My parents' generation, they're the ones that went to California and Salt Lake, and they didn't have the economic possibilities that we have now. It takes water for our children to be able to live and stay here. And right now in Washington County, we have 30,000 school children in our K through 12 ages. Now, I know they won't all stay here, but I hope many of them can. And I know that others will move in. And so water is always going to be important. Our first major pipeline was from Pine Valley, and that was dug and put in the 30s. And in the 70s, we've got a pipeline from Gunlock brought in. And now we've got a pipeline from Quail that feeds all of our large communities. And so I think that on these generational project Lane, we have to make sure that we can do them responsibly and afford them. But 100 years from now, if we give up Utah's right to the Colorado River water, and it's water that falls on Utah mountains and goes into the Colorado River, I think it would be the biggest and most painful mistake we could ever make.
What was the consensus of the people you talked to when you were?
As I visited with some of the people who were adamantly against the Lake Powell Pipeline, and that's because they're here, their time frame that they're seeing life is maybe 10, 15 years. I'm looking at it generationally. And I told them, I understand why you feel that way. And more often than not, they'd look at me and say, and I understand why you feel the way that you do as well. There's always validity in almost every point of view. And it's, I think, the role of the discerning policymaker in deciding how to weight and calculate what will be of greatest benefit to an area's residents 10, 20, 50, and 100 years out.
You compared the Quail Creek cost to the assessed valuation. What's the assessed valuation?
The Lake
now?
Powell pipeline, by the way, Lane, is only 5% of the assessed valuation of Washington County.
What's their projection of cost?
Yeah, and so proportionately, it's a much smaller project than even Quail Lake was.
As compared to the assessed value.
Correct, yeah.
What about some alternatives, trading the shares in there for some out in Nevada?
Well, that doesn't work at all for a variety of reasons. Utah didn't agree to the exchange of water, letting Nevada pump the water, because that aquifer straddles the Utah and Arizona border. And as you pump that, it would dry the springs and destroy the agrarian quality of life that they have. Basically, what we would be doing is bringing Utah water down here and giving up Utah's water in the Colorado. Utah needs all of its water, Lane, not just half of it.
Well, I like water. I like to drink water.
Yeah, I think we all do.
I used to drink root beer too, but I've given up on that.
A lot of times we don't stop to think of it, but we think of our economy. If that were an engine, water is really the lubricant that makes it work.
We got 1 minute and 30 seconds left. What's your final word?
You know, this has been an amazing experience for me, and I'm anxious to roll up my sleeves and go to work. I want our residents to know that I will have an open mind, an open heart, and most importantly, an open door. And one thing about your county commissioners and other local elected officials, you'll bump into them in the grocery store. You have a chance to know who they are, and you can come and visit with us. And my door will always be open. And while we may not always agree on everything, I think we can agree that we all love living and working in Washington
And
County.
you're going to take me for that airplane ride?
I need to do that.
I better come too.
We've been visiting with Dean Cox, Commissioner-elect for Washington County. We appreciate him being with us today. We wish him well in his new calling. This is Lane Ronno from the campus of Dixie State University. Thanks for being with us on A Story to Tell.